Okay, so I'm going to go over the national oversight agencies and organizations, which is really mainly focusing on 2.4. I'm not going to go through every one of these sections. I highly encourage you to read it. There's a lot of small, detailed information, but I'm going to try and highlight the areas that I know that the board certification exam, PTCB, covers quite heavily. So let me focus on those things here. So to start off with, let's talk a little bit about the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which I know you guys have all heard about, especially with COVID and the vaccinations, but they oversee a lot of different things for medications. They're kind of our branch of governmental body that oversees everything, but there are a lot of subdivisions that are overseen by the FDA because they can't do it all. So some of these subdivisions I've listed here, like the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, this CEDAR. It is probably one of the more important ones. It oversees a lot of different things associated with the FDA, and this is mainly what pharmacies deal with. So they focus on new drug development, generic drug review, over-the-counter drug review, and post-drug approval activities. So um, pretty important. I mean, the FDA is really the public safety watchdog, and it enforces regulations such as truthful advertising for food and drug packaging and labeling and marketing. And I know you guys have all watched TV or watched a commercial where they have these long drawn out advertisements about medications, and you're listening to it and you hear all these side effects and you think, why would anybody take that? Well, that is all regulated by the FDA, and it is required by law that they put that information out there. There's also a program called MedWatch, and every advertisement must have the 1-800 MedWatch number available, and that is a anonymous reporting website that if you're having any adverse or negative effects of a medication, you can report it to that organization, and that is also overseen by the FDA, which is really a big component of what the FDA does. They want to make sure medications are safe and effective for us to use, and that anything that's being advertised or released, they're properly labeled, they're properly packaged, they have the information on it that you need for public, and that they're properly marketed so that people that do take medications are knowing what they're taking. So some of the other smaller offices are Office of Pediatric Therapy, because obviously pediatrics are going to have different dosing than adults. The Center for Device and Radiological Health. Pharmacies started overseeing medical devices. A common one might be an insulin pump. And pharmacies do oversee those now. They used to not, but they do now. A Center for Biologic Evaluations and Research. So I put vaccines here because a lot of the biologic evaluations are vaccines, but you can also see other biologicals like insulin or growth hormone or something like that can be considered a biological. And the Office of Orphan Product Development, which the Orphan Drug Act is where this one came from, which you guys learned last unit or last module. So next I'm going to move me up into this corner so you guys can see this image here. This is the Orange Book. Also, the actual name is Approved Drug Products with Therapeutic Equivalence Evaluation. And this is a book you're going to want to know what it does. It includes all the drugs that are approved by both that approved for both their safety and their efficacy. So any drug that has been approved by the FDA should be present in here. It's used by wholesalers and in pharmacies primarily to make sure that generic products can be safely substituted for brand name drugs. I would know this slide very well because you will most likely have a question on your board exam about the Orange Book, which is equivalency. So we're trying to make sure, for example, a common drug that I'm not sure if you guys how familiar you are with drugs or what you've covered in drug class, but one of them is Prilosec, which is used for stomach. And then the generic name is omeprazole. So if you've been prescribed Prilosec by your physician, a lot of times they will fill it with omeprazole because their equivalency is the same. It's just the omeprazole is cheaper. So if you ever see like, oh, you have Prilosec, but you're like, well, that's not what it says on my vial, it could be omeprazole, which is the generic form of the exact same brand name drug. And this book is where they go to make sure that it's equivalent. Okay. These next page, I'm new to these two drugs. I learned them when I read the book. But the purple book and the green book. And I did put a link in here that you can go to if you would like to see what, if you want more information about the purple book or the green book. And I'll go ahead and put this PowerPoint with the video so you have access to it. But this one is, the title is A List of Licensed Biological Products with Reference Product Exclusively and Biosimilarity or Interchangeable Evaluation. Mouthful. Purple book is much easier. And then this one is more animal drug products, FDA approved animal drug products, and this is known as the green book. Now, when I pulled these pictures up, they were not purple and green, so I didn't put a picture of them on there, but I do have a link, and I will post this PowerPoint so you guys, if you would like to have more information about those books, you are welcome to look at them. Now, the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Convention, USP, you should be familiar with this. FDA works very closely with the USP. And USP, this is what it does. It's an independent, nonprofit scientific organization. And it uses its quality standards for prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, and dietary supplements. It really creates standards for pharmacies to follow, is what it does. That's its whole purpose. So the Pharmacopoeia National Formulary is usually abbreviated USP-NF. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later in this presentation, but it's really, think about quality standards. And standards are a list of steps that we should follow to make sure that we're giving the highest quality care to our patients. So in a pharmacy, there are certain standards that we must meet to make sure we're giving quality care to every patient that comes into the pharmacy. Next is the Drug Enforcement Agency, and I put a picture of We're the Millers because every time I think of the DEA, I think of his face. So maybe it'll make you remember this, but this is a huge agency. This oversees all controlled substance. So my first question to you is, what is a controlled substance? Do you guys know when I say controlled substance what I'm referring to? Not every drug is a controlled substance. The only ones that are controlled substances are anything that is considered that has an addiction ability to it. If you take this medication and you can become addicted to it, it will fall underneath a controlled substance. So there's 5 categories of controlled substance. Category 1 is the most addictive. Category 5 is the least addictive. Category 1 is illegal drugs like heroin. Category 5 is drugs that are not quite as addictive, so a lot of like diarrhea medications, because narcotics can slow your stomach down, so it slows down fecal matter from going through the intestinal tract, and it'll absorb more water, and it can slow that motion down. Lyrica is a real common one, which is used for diabetic neuropathy. So those are your controlled, that's what's considered a controlled substance. And that's what the DEA does, is it oversees any medication that's listed as a controlled substance. So it's responsible for enforcing those laws regarding potential addictions of both illegal and legal drugs. So when you see movies that the DEA is coming and taking down the cartel or whatever, in a movie, it's the DEA. The same thing is as a pharmacy technician. You have to know what the DEA wants. Like, you have to make sure you are doing proper record keeping of every narcotic that comes in inventory and every narcotic or controlled substance that goes out. So drugs like Vicodin, Oxycontin, Dilaudid, all of those are controlled 2s. They're level 2s. Suboxone. Those all, every time they can't get refilled, there's no refills on them. patient has to bring in a new prescription every single time. There's lots of regulations. If you drop one on the floor, you have to fill out a report that said you damaged one or you stepped on it. They need to know what, if you brought in 100 Vicodin into your pharmacy, they need to see where all 100 went if they came into your doors and wanted to know. So if you only had 50 left, where did the other 50 go? And you have to prove to them that they had been dispensed, like if they fell on the ground and you stepped on two, if they were stolen, if they were lost, anything. And they have to have paperwork on every single one of those things. So the DEA inspects all medical facilities, including pharmacies, what that may have any suspicious activity is detected. So if they think that there's anything strange, they're going to come and check on you. And I'm going to give you a scenario. So my mother, who has passed away, her bless her heart, she was a very sick woman, and she was on a lot of narcotics for back pain because she basically had cancer in her back and it destroyed her backbone. So she had these rods in her back to prevent her from falling over. Okay. So she was on a lot of narcotics, and her chart, every time the DEA came in, they targeted my mother because of her narcotics, and they would question the physician, they would question the pharmacist, they would question the pharmacy technician as to why this particular patient was getting so many narcotics. And it was my mom. And I know that because my sister's a pharmacist. So on top of that, they wanted to make sure my sister, as a pharmacist, wasn't illegally providing medication illegally to my mother. So big red flag for the DEA. They wanted to check it out. It always checked out. It was always fine, but that is something they do track. They track the flow of controlled substances or narcotics from manufacturers to whole warehouses to pharmacy to patients. And they do this because I don't know if you guys remember in 2012, probably not, you guys are all too young, but Florida was shut down. They could not distribute narcotics from a certain warehouse for like 2 years because they were illegally distributing narcotics or controlled substances to particular pharmacies. So, which kind of brings me to my next slide. Wholesalers will set limits on the amount of controlled substance that they will sell or deliver to individual pharmacies for what happened in 2012 in Florida. In Florida, in 2012, they had a huge Oxycontin epidemic there, and they were having a lot of issues. So the DEA went in and started investigating. And some people that may have been legitimately doing things were shut down because it looked like they were moving too many controlled substances in a particular area. So really important to understand that process and what the DEA is capable of doing. So the next one here, let me slide me down here, is the National Council of Prescription Drug Program. This is a nonprofit organization for members in the pharmacy service industry that uses a 6-digit processing ID code called the BIN number. And this is used in pharmacies, and pharmaceutical providers use these for online electronic transmissions. If you look at your insurance card, you will see a BIN number on there for your pharmacy, and they use that BIN number for also insurance payment. It is kind of, the BIN number used to be known as a bank identification number for electronic movement of money, and now they've used that same concept in a pharmacy for electronic record keeping in pharmacies. And then there's an NPI, which is the National Provider Identifier. It's a 10-digit number used by CMS. CMS is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, so Medicaid and Medicare for reimbursement of that insurance. And Medicare is usually seen in elderly patients, so retired people have Medicare as their insurance provider, and Medicaid is used for low-income people that can't afford insurance. Poverty, very low income, it can get approval for Medicaid, and that's a government insurance. So they use these BIN numbers, and that's what the NCPDP, which is a lot of acronyms here, does. I think on this, it's really important to understand the BIN number. This is an organization, let me slide me up here again, is the National Association of the Board of Pharmacy, NABP. You guys can become members of this. It can actually monitor your continuing education for you. It makes it really easy, and I'm a member of this as well, and it's free. It does not cost anything to be a member of NABP. It's a professional organization, and it represents all 50 states. It kind of streamlined laws for states because every state has their own state board of pharmacy and every state has their own law. And this kind of picked the best practices and delivered it to the states so they could incorporate it in their state. It has no power over anything. It's just professional organization. It's just kind of gathering information and sharing it. Now, the state board of pharmacy is legal and every state has their own state board of pharmacy. And when you become a pharm tech and you practice, you have to register with whatever state you're practicing in. So if you stay here in Texas, you will register with the Texas State Board of Pharmacy, and you'll have to pay a fee every 2 years to maintain your practicing license. If you go to Oklahoma, you'll do the same. Now, your PTCB, which is your board exam, that is a national exam, and you have to prove to the state that you've passed that exam, and then you can register with the state. So your board certification is the PCTB, but you have to prove that you are qualified to be a pharm tech in each state. And some states may require you to do a law test. It's rare, but it could happen because every state could have their own different sets of laws. So the pharmacy practice standards, I mentioned this already. They're overseen by USP, the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. So they develop these practice standards, which are basically ensuring that the practice of pharmacies and pharm techs are following a good quality standard practice. Standard of care is what we call it. The main two is with compounding medications safely. So compounding is mixing medications together, maybe making an ointment or a gel, and then there's sterile compounding, which this is an image here, where they're making syringes or IVs or injectable medications. So the US Pharmacopoeia National Formulary, that's what NF stands for, USPNF 795 is non-sterile compounding, stuff that you can do in a community pharmacy. Now, the 797 is sterile compounding, which you're going to learn a little bit about in institutional pharmacy, which is usually done in a hospital setting where they're making IVs, and we'll learn how to calculate that medication and do that in the spring. And then my last slide is, this is section 2.6. I'm encouraging you to read this. I didn't really cover it really. I put a few definitions on here for you. So a few things you might want to look over, like negligence, malpractice, what is torts, the 4 Ds of negligence, some things that you can look over, basically, which could be who's liable. It can be in any medical practice. This is not specific for pharmacy. But as a pharm tech, if you make an error or you're negligent or a tort can include slander or yell at a customer, you are liable and you can get sued. So you need to probably read through this and know what professional behaviors are required and what you can and cannot do, which, is kind of important. Not too much of this will be on the board exam, so I'm not really going to cover it heavily, but I think this is your own personal understanding of your responsibilities as a pharmacy technician. So this all came from your textbook. I should have put my resource on here, but I will next time, I promise. But all this information I researched through, and I put it on the very front page here. I got it in chapter 2, 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, and 2.7. So I encourage you to read those sections, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.